I found out my husband was cheating at our wedding reception. And even now, when she thinks about it, she still says it doesn't feel real, like it was some kind of nightmare she was forced to live through in slow motion. Because just a few hours before that moment, she was standing at what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Everything looked perfect. The decorations, the guests, the smiles, the music, everything felt like a dream she had been waiting for her entire life. She was a bride, surrounded by people she loved, believing that this was the beginning of her forever. But sometimes, the most beautiful moments hide the most painful truths. And no one ever expects their world to break on the very day it is supposed to begin. Because what she didn't know at that time was that something was already wrong, something was already happening right in front of her eyes, hidden behind celebrations and fake smiles. And in just a few moments, everything she believed about love, trust, and marriage was about to collapse in a way she could never have imagined. Because this wasn't just a wedding story, this was the moment her entire life changed forever. And the worst part? It all happened, right there, at her own wedding reception. And before we go any further into this story, just take a moment and think about it properly. What would you do if you were in her place? Would you freeze in shock and stay silent? Or would you stand up and confront everything in front of everyone, even if it meant your entire world collapsing in a single second? Because sometimes in life, we don't get time to think. We only get moments to react, and those reactions decide everything that comes after. But what makes this story even more intense is that she didn't react immediately. She waited, and that waiting changed everything. And if you're someone who loves emotional, dramatic, and real Reddit-style stories like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because here we don't just tell stories, we experience them, we break them down. And we go deep into what people actually go through behind closed doors, and trust me, stories like this will stay with you long after the video ends. Now coming back to her story, she explained that on the surface, everything in her life looked perfect. Her relationship was something people admired from the outside, something that looked stable, loving, and full of trust. Her husband was the kind of person who knew how to present himself well, charming in conversations, caring in moments that mattered, and someone who made her feel like she had chosen the right partner for life. For a long time, she genuinely believed that she was safe in that relationship, that she had built something real, something strong, something that would last. Their journey together didn't happen overnight. It was built slowly, through shared moments, small memories, long conversations about the future, and plans that made everything feel secure and predictable. Friends and family saw them as a perfect couple, the kind that people look at and think they really belong together. And naturally, that kind of image slowly turns into pressure of expectations, pressure of commitment, and, eventually, the pressure of marriage. As time passed, the wedding became the center of everything: months of planning, endless decisions, careful attention to detail. Everything was designed to create what was supposed to be the most beautiful day of their lives. From the venue to the decorations, from the guest list to the smallest emotional touches, everything was prepared with love and excitement, or at least, that's what she believed at the time. Because what she didn't realize then was that behind all of that planning and celebration, something was slowly starting to fall apart, something she hadn't noticed yet, and it was already closer than she ever imagined. The wedding day finally arrived, and for her, it felt like stepping into a dream she had been imagining for so long that it almost didn't feel real anymore. Everything around her looked perfect, almost too perfect, like every small detail had been carefully placed to create a moment that would stay in memory forever. The venue was beautifully decorated, soft lights filling the space with warmth, flowers arranged in a way that made everything feel elegant and emotional at the same time, and as she walked through it all, she truly believed this was the beginning of the most important chapter of her life. The ceremony itself went exactly as planned. Emotional vows were exchanged, tears were shed, smiles were shared, and for a brief moment, everything felt pure, untouched, safe. It was the kind of moment people remember for the rest of their lives, the kind of moment that feels like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. But sometimes, Life doesn't warn you before it changes everything. As the ceremony ended and the reception began, the atmosphere shifted into celebration. Laughter filled the room, music played softly in the background. Guests were enjoying themselves, and from the outside, it looked like a perfect celebration of love and unity. But perfection, as it turns out, can sometimes hide the smallest cracks, cracks that only become visible when you start paying attention. At first, it was nothing serious, just small details that didn't feel quite right. Her husband seemed slightly different, not in a way that anyone else would notice immediately, but in a way that slowly started to make her uncomfortable. He was present, but not fully present, smiling, but not always engaged, and more importantly, his attention kept drifting away at random moments. She noticed him checking his phone more than usual, stepping away from conversations without explanation, and disappearing for a few minutes before returning as if nothing had happened. At first, she tried to ignore it. She told herself it was just wedding stress, that maybe he was overwhelmed, or maybe there were responsibilities he needed to handle. After all, weddings are chaotic, emotional, and exhausting for both people involved. But even after convincing herself of that, the feeling didn't disappear. Instead, it grew quietly in the background, a small sense of unease that slowly became harder to ignore. Because deep down, something didn't feel aligned anymore. Something felt slightly off, like a silence between moments that shouldn't have existed. And then came the moment that shifted everything, a moment so small that it could have easily gone unnoticed, but once seen, it couldn't be unseen. She saw him across the reception area, standing a little too close to someone she didn't recognize, a woman whose presence immediately felt unfamiliar in that setting. At first, it seemed harmless, just another guest maybe, just a casual interaction, but the way they were speaking, the way they stood, the way the conversation felt too comfortable, too natural, it planted the first real doubt in her mind. And in that instant, something inside her changed, because suspicion doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives quietly, and then it grows. And what she didn't realize at that moment was that this small feeling, this single observation, was the beginning of everything about to fall apart. At first, she tried to convince herself that it was nothing, just a misunderstanding created by stress, emotions, and the overwhelming nature of the day. She kept telling herself that she was overthinking, because that's what the mind does when it doesn't want to accept something painful. But even after trying to calm herself down, that feeling didn't leave. It stayed there, quietly growing in the background, becoming heavier with every passing minute. She started observing more carefully, not openly, not in a way that would make anyone notice, but silently, from a distance, trying to understand what was really happening. And the more she paid attention, the more uncomfortable everything became. Her husband's behavior was no longer something she could easily ignore. It wasn't just random distractions anymore, it was patterns. He would step away at specific times, always for short moments, always returning with the same expression, as if nothing had happened, as if he was carefully maintaining a version of himself for everyone else to see. And that version started to feel unfamiliar to her. Still, she didn't jump to conclusions. She didn't want to believe the worst without proof, because nobody wants their happiest day to turn into something painful based on assumptions alone. But sometimes, truth doesn't wait for certainty. It reveals itself whether you are ready or not. And then came the moment that changed everything completely. She saw him again across the reception, but this time it wasn't just a passing glance or a confusing detail. This time, she noticed everything clearly. The distance he kept, the way his body turned slightly away when others were near, and most importantly, the woman. The same woman she had noticed earlier. But now, something felt different. It wasn't just proximity anymore, it was familiarity. The kind of familiarity that doesn't belong between strangers. The kind that raises questions you don't want to ask. And before she could even process what she was seeing, her attention shifted to something else, his phone. A small moment. A simple notification lighting up the screen. But in that single second, everything became clear. She saw enough. Just a glimpse, just a few words, but enough to break the illusion completely. Her heart dropped instantly, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet, sinking realization that something she feared might be true actually was. Time felt like it slowed down. The noise of the reception faded into the background, laughter became distant, music became meaningless, and all she could focus on was what she had just seen. In that moment, denial disappeared completely. There was no confusion left. No excuses left to give. No way to interpret it differently. Everything she was trying to protect herself from thinking was now standing right in front of her as reality. And the hardest part wasn't just the betrayal itself, it was the location of it. The timing of it. The fact that it was happening on a day that was supposed to represent love, trust, and forever. And instead of reacting immediately, instead of breaking down or confronting everything in chaos, something unexpected happened inside her, a shift. A strange calmness. Because when shock reaches its deepest point, emotions don't always explode, sometimes they freeze. And in that silence, she made a decision, one that would completely change how this story would end. In that moment, when everything inside her finally became clear, she didn't react the way anyone would expect. There was no sudden breakdown, no emotional explosion, no dramatic confrontation in the middle of the crowd. Instead, something very different happened. She became quiet, almost unnaturally calm. Because when a person reaches a point where pain becomes too heavy, sometimes it doesn't come out as noise, it turns into silence. And in that silence, she made a decision. She realized that what was happening wasn't just a private betrayal anymore. It had been unfolding in public, hidden in plain sight, on what was supposed to be the most meaningful day of her life. So whatever she chose to do next, it couldn't be hidden either. It had to match the moment. It had to be just as real, just as public, just as undeniable. And so she waited. She continued acting normal, smiling when needed, responding to guests, moving through the reception like nothing was wrong, while inside, her mind was completely focused on one thing: timing. Because she wasn't confused anymore. She wasn't searching for answers anymore. She already had them. Now all that remained was execution. And then the moment came. The reception naturally shifted into speeches, attention slowly gathering toward the center of the room, conversations quieting down, glasses being raised, and all eyes gradually turning toward the couple. It was the perfect moment. The kind of moment where people expect happiness, gratitude, celebration, not truth. She stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and took the microphone. At first, nobody thought anything was wrong. She smiled gently, her voice steady, almost soft, as she began speaking like any bride would, thanking guests for coming, appreciating the effort, the love, the support, everything sounding normal, almost too normal. But then, something changed. A pause. A shift in tone that most people wouldn't notice at first, but once it began, it couldn't be ignored. Her voice lost its warmth. Her words became sharper, clearer, heavier. And then, without warning, she said it. The truth. Not hinted. Not softened. Not hidden. She revealed exactly what she had seen, what had been happening, and what had just been confirmed in front of her eyes. And in that single moment, the entire room froze. The laughter disappeared instantly. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The music felt distant and meaningless. Every person in the room turned their attention toward her in shock, trying to understand what they were hearing. And her husband, the man standing beside her just moments ago, was now completely exposed. His expression changed instantly, the confidence gone, replaced with panic and disbelief as reality caught up to him in front of everyone. There was no space left for denial. No room for excuses. No way to hide what had already been said out loud. And she didn't raise her voice. She didn't create chaos. She didn't need to. Because the truth itself was louder than anything she could have said. And when she finally finished speaking, she didn't wait for an explanation. She didn't ask for justification. She simply stepped back, and in front of everyone in that room, she took her power back. After she stepped back and placed the microphone down, there was a silence in the room that felt heavier than anything anyone had experienced before. It wasn't just shock, it was disbelief. Nobody knew how to react, because in just a few minutes, what was supposed to be a celebration had turned into something no one was prepared for. Her husband stood there frozen, completely exposed in front of everyone he knew, unable to find the words that could undo what had already been said. And she didn't wait. She didn't stay in that moment any longer than she needed to. Because sometimes, when the truth is finally spoken out loud, there is nothing left to argue with. No explanation that can fix what has already broken. So she simply walked away. Not in anger, not in chaos, but in a strange kind of calmness that comes after emotional collapse, when a person realizes that staying would only hurt them more than leaving ever could. As she left the reception behind her, she wasn't just leaving a wedding, she was leaving behind an entire version of her life she thought she was going to live. The future she imagined, the promises she believed in, the trust she gave without hesitation, all of it now felt like something distant, something that belonged to someone else's story. And even though it hurt, even though it broke something inside her, there was also something else beginning to form quietly within her: strength. The kind of strength that only comes after betrayal, after truth, after everything falls apart and there is nothing left to hold on to except yourself. Later, when she shared her story, people were divided. Some said she should have handled it privately, some said she overreacted, while others believed she did exactly what needed to be done in a moment where silence would have meant accepting disrespect. But for her, it was never about what people thought. It was about truth. About refusing to stay silent in a moment where everything was already exposed. Because in the end, this story isn't just about cheating or a wedding gone wrong. It's about what happens when trust breaks in the most public way possible, and how sometimes the only way to take your power back is to stop protecting the person who broke it. So now the question is not just what she did, but what would you have done in her place? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have done exactly what she did? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more Reddit confessions and real-life dramatic stories like this. Because trust me, there are many more stories coming that will make you question everything you think you know about love, trust, and relationships.